So now let's talk about the 7 fundamentals of shooting. This is the core foundation to shooting. So when you're looking at how do I become more accurate, how do I shoot faster, this is where it starts. And the first thing that we look at from the ground up is stance. How do we stand? Now, again, just like I covered yesterday really quickly, you have to figure out what fits your lifestyle. And I'm gonna cover things and I'm gonna do things in a certain manner because that fits my lifestyle, and you're gonna have to judge that for yourself. And when I look at a particular technique, I kind of look at it as pros and cons, and that's for you to decide on your journey whether it fits your lifestyle or not. So the first stance that we're gonna look at is the weaver stance. The weaver stance is running a little bit more bladed, so my approach to the threat is a little bit more bladed in nature. However, the advantage is a little bit bigger here, a little bit smaller in profile. Now, technique-wise, we usually, if this was my dominant hand, meaning I'm strong hand on the right, I extend the arm out, so I use a push, and then the reaction hand or the support hand would do a pull and do what we call more of a push-pull technique. So 60% of the force went out on this arm, and then of course this arm came down, a little bit of a double thumb grip here, and we'll talk about grip later on, and we ran generally a bent elbow. We'd bring the gun up, fire, and we had a lot of guys like this because as they bridged this right arm out, okay, it maintained a little bit more linear towards the target. This arm typically would brace, okay, so we had this pushing and this pulling back. So a lot of guys really preferred this technique in regards to shooting as they brought their weapon up in order to fire. When we look at movement, couple things that you have to consider. The first thing is movement forward or movement rear. As long as the threat was close, to make movement forward, typically in this position or if I'm shooting, they would start to take that step in advance, okay, in a forward position. I almost look at it as the guys who do a little bit of sword play, okay, and how they're always kind of lined up and a little bit more linear to the target and longer to the target. So the movement is something that you have to consider. Now, anything past, you know, whatever you would deem just that quick explosive movement initially, then would turn into, well, are you going to run like this? Or are you still kind of in a weaver stance? So at a certain point, you may end up having to break out of that stance because now you're on a run or you're having to move from one position to another position. Moving rear would be the same way. So if I had to move rear, I would drop back just a little bit and I would always try to stay as linear to the target as possible. Now, to me, one of the advantages is the fact that I am a much smaller target. Okay. Now with the introduction of body armor, typically we want to always put body armor now towards the threat. That way we don't get shot in the heart or lung. As far as the kneeling goes, once I'm in the weaver position, if I'm shooting, I just drop down, I'm on my knee, I get right back up. So mobility wise, as far as standing to kneeling, not really a huge concern. The next thing that we typically look at is engagement from one target to another. So if for some reason I was to line up on this target over here and bring the gun up and fire, and I was in this particular stance, 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna have to reposition the leg and the foot in order to get a shot on that other target. So there's a lot of body movement, lower body, that you have to do in order to perform this. Again, not that big of a deal. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that if I have to, on an adverse angle, engage one target, typically most of the time, I'm gonna have to reposition my foot in order to shoot that second target if it's on an adverse angle. If it's close, it's not really going to matter because I'm just going to go from this position, bring the gun up, fire, and then fire from here with no lower body movement. So on the isosceles, typically it's just legs apart, and then when we grab the gun, we just punch back out and we go from here. So for me, having a wider gait is important, keeping my head over my hips. Not only that, but I take my left leg and I load my left leg. It's very, very important. So when I'm shooting, I have a little bit of pressure in that left leg. Now, when we were looking at stances earlier, as far as adverse angles go, for me, if I choose not to move my lower body, all that I have to do is simply come out here, shift weight from one leg to another, present out, shoot, and then move, pivot in the upper body and shoot from here. So what we look at is there's a little bit of a trade-off between the two stances in regards to adverse angles, and that is how much do I really have to move my lower body? Do I have to pick the foot up, turn it, and drop it in order to shoot? Or can I just quickly go from this position, do an engagement here, bring that gun right back, and then punch out from there and engage that target as well. So movement is extremely important when we're talking about adverse angles, just in regards to stance.